Episode 1: The Unwritten Invitation. Some doors aren't opened with keys, they're unlocked by memory. Rain painted the windows of the night train as it snaked its way into Malang. Tama watched the city blur past, his fingers tracing the edges of an old envelope. Its paper, yellowed, brittle at the folds, and sealed with a wax emblem he didn't recognize. The letter inside bore no sender, no date, just a typewritten line in Dutch, Kamer 33 de gang zonder speak. Room 33. The corridor without reflection. Tama wasn't a believer in myths, but he was drawn to forgotten things, stories left in the margins of history books. And Wisma Tumapel, a decaying colonial structure tucked behind rows of government buildings, had been calling to him since he first heard its name whispered in a conversation between librarians. He arrived just before dusk. The building stood like a slumbering relic, shrouded in ivy and quiet resentment. No one else seemed to notice. IT people passed by with their umbrellas, never once glancing up. But as Tama pushed open the rusted gate, he felt the air thicken, like stepping into a different time. Inside, the silence clung to the walls like dust. His flashlight cut through the gloom, revealing peeling wallpaper, chandeliers coated in cobwebs, and portraits of men in stiff collars glaring down as if still guarding their estate. The receptionist's desk was long abandoned, a ledger still open to a page from 1943. Tama's fingers hovered over the brittle paper. Names, dates, and then the initials, E.V., scribbled beside room 33. He found the staircase at the back, winding upward like a spine. With each step, the creaking grew louder as if the building resented being disturbed. The third floor was darker, colder. At first glance, it looked like any other hotel corridor until he realized something was missing. Along the hallway walls were dusty mirror frames, but each pane of glass had been scraped away or shattered long ago. Reflections had no home here. Tama approached room 33. The number plate hung crooked. He hesitated, hand resting on the knob, heart ticking louder than the rain. Then, slowly, he pushed the door open. The room greeted him with stillness. A canopy bed, half-eaten by moths. A fireplace, its bricks stained with dust. And in the far corner, tilted slightly, was a full-length mirror. This one wasn't broken, but it also wasn't right. Thomas stepped closer and blinked. The room showed behind him. The furniture, the light, but not him. His reflection was missing. Or worse, then the mirror fogged, as though someone on the other side had breathed onto the glass. A soft whisper filled the air. Feminine, foreign, G bent, angelic higher. You're finally here. The whisper slipped through the cracks in his mind, chilled his spine. He turned toward the door, ready to flee, but paused. There, on the vanity table, was a small book with a red ribbon. Its leather cover bore the same wax emblem as the letter. He picked it up. Inside, elegant handwriting danced across the pages. Dutch, faded ink. A diary. The first entry. March 3rd, 1939. My name is Amelia Vandellen. ... Tama's fingers trembled. Behind him, the mirror shimmered again, this time, revealing not the room, but a face. Pale. Eyes full of longing, lips moving, soundless but unmistakable. Please, tell my story. The light flickered. The door creaked closed, and Tama realized he hadn't entered just a room. He had stepped into a promise left unanswered. Episode 2. The reflection that wasn't Tama barely slept. He had left Wisma Tumapel with Amelia's diary in his backpack, yet the building refused to stay behind. That night at the guest house, he dreamt of a ballroom under flickering candlelight, of a woman dancing alone, spinning slowly beneath a stained glass window of lilies. Her eyes met his before the dream shattered. By morning, he was already walking back. This time, he brought a voice recorder, a field journal, and a cautious sense of purpose. He wasn't just following a myth anymore. Something about the diary made this personal. Her words were raw, unpolished, and urgent. Entries spoke of loneliness, of forbidden love, and a growing fear. The handwriting shook more with every page. Back on the third floor, the hallway felt colder. The mirror hadn't moved. But now, as Tama stood before it, He noticed scratches at the edges like someone had tried to claw their way out. He raised his voice recorder. This is Tama, June 20th, 2025. Location, room 33. The mirror is cold, even though the air is warm. Still no reflection. He reached out. As his fingers brushed the glass, a pulse shot through his chest. For a split second, the room behind him, distorted leak, looking into rippled water and then returned to stillness. But Tama knew what he'd seen. Her, Amelia. She stood behind him, in the mirror, but not in the room, her eyes wide with desperation. She mouthed something. Tama stared harder. Help, ... Him, he whispered, reading her lips. Help who? Then the mirror fogged over once more, and with a soft hiss, the fireplace in the room ignited on its own. The flame was faint, flickering over the mantelpiece, and above it hung a photograph Tama hadn't noticed before. A black and white image of two people. One, a young Dutch woman. The other, a man in a servant's attire. Their hands almost touched, though the space between them was wide. It had no label, no date. But Tama knew this was Amelia, and this was him. Not Tama himself, no Saria. The name was written in the diary like a whisper of rebellion. He had been her protector, her secret, her undoing. Tama stepped back, pulse racing. Something in this room was alive with longing, with regret. He packed up quickly, but before leaving, he scribbled one thing in his journal. The mirror didn't reflect me.
It showed who came before me.
Or maybe, who I used to be. Episode 3. Amelia's diary. It was past midnight, but Tama hadn't slept a wink. The antique leather journal lay open on the desk. Its ink faded, but still legible. He'd spent hours cross-referencing phrases and handwriting styles. Dutch wasn't his strongest language, but some entries almost seemed to translate themselves as if the words wanted to be understood. The first clear line stopped him cold. I fear father suspects everything. March 17th, 1939, Tama's pen hovered in his notebook. Amelia van Dalen is the daughter of a high-ranking Dutch military officer. Her writing was elegant, wistful, but trembled beneath the surface. Her entries were mostly observations of the people working at the hotel, particularly one name she mentioned over and over, Surya. He brings me jasmine tea every morning, though I never ask. He never looks me in the eyes, but I feel seen all the same. Tama closed his eyes. He could picture her sitting at the vanity, stealing glances in the mirror, learning to read love without ever hearing it spoken aloud. The next pages turned darker. Father says the war is reaching Java. He has moved his weapons upstairs. I'm not allowed to walk the corridors past dusk. Surya didn't return today. I left him a note, in Dutch. I wonder if he can read it. There were tear stains on the corner of that page. Tama exhaled slowly. This wasn't just some ghost story. This was grief, preserved in ink. He read on. The guests have all gone. The Japanese are coming. Father drinks too much. I am trapped here. But Surya, he kissed my hand today. And I think that meant goodbye. His hand trembled slightly as he turned the last entry. August 16th, 1944. Tonight I heard gunshots. Then silence. Father never came back. Surya is gone. And I am no longer Amelia. The air in the room shifted. Tama looked up, and the mirror beside his desk, the one in his guest house, the one that had always shown his reflection, was fogging at the center. In the haze, a single phrase appeared, written like condensation from inside the glass. Thank you. And then, below it, he is still waiting. Tama's heart pounded. This wasn't just a diary. It was a map, and the next step wasn't in the past. It was waiting at the bottom of Wisma Tumapel. Episode 4. Letters behind the mirror. The rain hadn't stopped since Tama returned to Wisma. He stood once more in room 33, the diary cradled in his arms. This time, he brought with him a flashlight, an audio recorder, and a photo of Amelia and Surya he'd carefully restored the night before. Somehow, it gave him courage. The air inside the room felt heavier, as though the house was waiting. He placed the diary gently on the vanity and turned toward the tall mirror that dominated the far wall. The surface shimmered faintly even without light. He stepped closer and whispered, "What do you want me to find?" And the mirror answered. A sudden click echoed behind the glass, followed by a low, wooden groan. Tama froze. The left panel of the mirror trembled slightly, then creaked open an inch. His breath caught. It was a compartment, a hidden cavity behind the mirror. Hands shaking, he pried it open fully and pulled out a bundle of sealed letters. Dozens. Fragile. Many were addressed in elegant Dutch handwriting, some in messy Javanese script, but two stood out bound in red ribbon, their envelopes blank. Unopened. He opened the first one carefully. It was written by Surya. His penmanship was raw, almost desperate. The ink had bled in places, but Tama could still make out the first line. Amelia... They won't let us leave, but I've hidden everything in the place you always stood when you said you loved the sun. Tama lowered the page. Pulse racing. The vanity. The window. The mirror. What did it mean? Then the second letter responds. These weren't just love letters. They were a map, and room 33 wasn't the end of the trail, it was the beginning. There were places in the house no one had touched in decades. Locked rooms, bricked up halls, and one stairway at the edge of the west wing, once leading to the basement, now sealed. He stood, letters in hand, as the door behind him creaked gently open on its own. Episode 5. The staircase of anger. Tama stood frozen at the threshold of room 33. The door had opened by itself, deliberately. Behind it, the corridor stretched dimly toward the western wing of the building, a part he hadn't explored. No one had. The floorboards groaned beneath his steps, as if waking from a long, uneasy slumber. He followed instinct more than logic, moving past faded portraits and locked doors until he reached the end of the hallway, where a heavy oak cabinet stood against the wall like a barricade. It wasn't on the blueprint. Tama's fingers slipped behind it, touching cold concrete. No air flowed from the cracks, no light peeked through, but when he pressed his hand firmly against the wood, he felt it a hollow tremble. There was something behind it. With a grunt, he pushed the cabinet aside, revealing what time had tried to erase. A bricked-up archway, its outline barely visible, sealed shut like a forgotten scar. His heart pounded. He reached into his bag, pulling out a chisel and hammer he'd borrowed from a local antique restorer. One deep breath. Then he struck. The sound echoed through the corridor like a cry. Crack, crack, thud. With each strike, dust choked the air. Brick by brick, he chipped away until a sliver of darkness opened like an eye. A gust of musty air rushed out as if the space behind had been holding its breath for decades. He peered in. A narrow stone staircase spiraled downward into the earth, lit faintly by something unseen. Not electric, not candle. Something colder. The kind of light that didn't warm your skin, but stared back. Tama stepped in, the dust clinging to his clothes, the silence growing thicker. The deeper he went, the more the walls seemed to pulse, like a heartbeat muffled by stone. Then he heard it, a voice, distant, masculine, weeping. And with a single line carved crudely into the stone near the bottom of the stairs. He tried to save her. Tama froze. The final step crumbled slightly underfoot. He steadied himself, lifted the flashlit hand, gasped. The basement had been a holding room. Shackles still hung from the walls. Old maps, war plans, and in the center, collapsed in the dirt, lay the tattered remains of a servant's uniform, its fabric, preserved only by cold and sorrow. Tama stepped forward, breath caught in his throat. An envelope lay nearby. It bore the same wax emblem as Amelia's diary. He opened it. Inside, a sketch, hastily drawn in pencil. Amelia's face, smiling, and one line, scribbled in trembling script beneath it. She called me sunlight. Tama sank to his knees. This was where Surya had waited, had hoped, had wept. The building above had tried to forget, but the past remembers.
Episode 6, Surya. And the glory of August, the basement remained silent. But Tama could still feel the weight of the ethic with what had been left unsaid by candlelight. He examined the uniform again. A faded emblem rested at the collar, a stitched sigil of a sunburst hand-embroidered likely by Amelia. The sketch of her smile still trembled in Tama's hand, drawn decades ago by someone who no longer had the words to tell the story himself. Tama returned to room 33 that night, and for the first time, something new was waiting. A page loose, folded atop the diary. It hadn't been there before. Its ink was fresher than the rest, the handwriting unmistakably Amelia's. But rushed, panicked, if he is remembered as just a servant, then I have failed. He was fire in silence. He was courage, buried in a uniform meant to silence him. Surya was not mine, he was freedom's. Tama flipped a page. On the back, scribbled in broken Indonesian, Surya was part of them, the hidden ones. The ones who spoke through whispers, who traded wine bottles for leaflets, who smuggled maps beneath bed linens. A resist. From stories he'd heard, Tama had always assumed colonial Malang had been too orderly to host dissent. But here within Wisma Tumapel's walls, something had bloomed unseen. Surya had used his position, his invisibility, to pass messages, hide fugitives, document the truth with Amelia's help. The basement hadn't just been his prison, it had once been his bed. Then came August 1944. The diary confirmed it. Japanese forces had begun creeping closer, and Dutch control was crumbling. Chaos spilled through the archipelago like wildfire, and in the midst of it, Amelia's father grew paranoid, violent. He had discovered the letters, the love, the leaflets. Tama ran his fingers along the cracked spine of the diary. The final entries weren't angry, they were quiet, resigned. Yet one line glowed like embers on the page. Freedom will come, and when it does, I want his name to live there too. Outside, thunder rolled. But inside room 33, something had shifted. The chandelier lit on its own, soft golden lights. Tama looked up at the mirror. This time, no fog, no whispers. Behind his reflection, a figure stood in shadow, calm, proud, watching. Tama didn't flinch. He simply whispered, "I see you, sir." And for the first time, the mirror smiled back.
Episode 7. August 17th, 1944. Tama didn't sleep. Not after what he had seen in the mirror. Not after Sergei looked back. He returned to the Wisma early, still draped in morning fog. The letters, the diary, the uniform, everything he'd found began forming a constellation. But this day, August 17th, had weight. He sat on the floor of room 33 and opened the diary again. There it was. A final entry. One he hadn't seen before. I heard the radio whisper it that the Japanese are moving closer, that the Dutch may fall. Father drinks with his gun on the table, but tonight, Surya will come. I will wear white. I will stand in the mirror and not be afraid. And then nothing, but outside the window, Tama noticed something. Down in the garden's edge. An old flagpole, covered in vines. Forgotten. He raced down. Half buried at the base, wrapped in cloth and rusted cord, lay a small iron box. Inside, water damaged but intact, was a black notebook. Surya's pages written in a blend of Javanese and broken Dutch. Tama turned the pages slowly. The last one had a date. 17 Agustus tahun 1944, and a line. I heard her footsteps. I knocked twice. Her father answered with a fist. But I slipped her the note. She smiled anyway. We'd planned to meet in the ballroom. At midnight, Tama's breath caught. There had never been a ballroom listed in the structure's blueprint, but the West Wing, sealed tight for decades, what? He went there. Found another door, half covered by bookcases, its hinges rusted but breakable. Inside, a domed ceiling, cracked windows, and the faint outline of a parquet floor beneath the dust. The ballroom. Suddenly, the wind howled through the cracks, and the lights flickered on. Faint music spilled through the air. A waltz, vintage, heartbreaking. And there she was, Amelia. In the white dress. Alone. Spinning. Slowly. Thomas stepped back as the scene unfolded like a memory too heavy to carry. A door slamming, a gun drawn, a cry cut short. Then silence. Then nothing. Just the empty ballroom. But on the floor, Tama saw a scrap of fabric delicate lace embroidered with the same sunburst as Soria's color. He picked it up, the music stopped. The room dimmed, and a whisper, echo not sad, not afraid, but steady. Tell it right, please. Tama nodded. In his journal, he wrote, They did meet, but the world was not yet ready to let them dance. Episode 8. The house that broke its promise. The ballroom now lay still. Only the sound of Tama's breath and the soft rustling of dead leaves dancing across the marble floor remained. He stood with the embroidered lace still clenched in his hand, unsure what was more overwhelming, the love that had bloomed here or the violence that had buried it. But the house wasn't done speaking. A soft knock-3 tapsy code from above. Tama turned sharply. Not from the ballroom. Not from room 33. From the stairwell. He followed it, one cautious step after another, until he reached the main hallway where daylight flickered through stained glass. There, standing by the cracked reception desk, was a man, frail, dressed in a gray batik shirt, leaning on a cane. His eyes were distant, but they found Tama's like someone recognizing a shadow from long ago. You've found them, the old man said in Bahasa. I knew someone would come back. Tama hesitated. How do you know who I'm looking for? I don't, the man replied, but the Wisma does. He introduced himself as Paxano, once the night watchman in the early 1960s. He was the last person to live in the building, and the only one who stayed long enough to listen. I used to hear music late at night, he said, his voice trembling. Two silhouettes dancing in the empty ballroom. One wore white. The other always bowed when the song ended. Did anyone else see it? Tama asked. No, Paxano said. They only appear to those who believe their story was real. From inside his coat, the old man carefully unwrapped a small velvet pouch and placed something in Tama's hand. A silver necklace with a single amber stone. Amelia's. He'd found it tucked behind a loose floorboard. When the building was being cleared decades ago, he meant to return it, but something had always stopped him. I dreamed of her last night, he said softly. She asked if I was ready to let go. Tama stared at the pendant. It felt warm. Then, for a moment, the chandelier in the lobby flickered to life. A breeze drifted through the hallway, and from somewhere upstairs, a faint melody began to play. The same waltz from the ballroom. Familiar now? Haunting? Beautiful? She's waiting for you? Paxano said, smiling faintly. One last thing needs to be seen. Episode 9. The loop of fate. The pendant was still warm in Tama's palm when the waltz faded. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it pulsed with memory. Paxano had already vanished into the mist. No goodbye, no sound of footsteps. Just gone. Wisma Tumapel was like, that it. Gave what it must, then took things quietly. Back in room 33, Tama sat beside the mirror again. But this time, when he looked in, he wasn't himself. Not fully. In his reflection, he wore Soraya's jacket, his face still, his butt softer, younger. As if grief had rewound time, he blinked, and in the mirror, his hand lifted before his real hand did. The mirror was no longer reflecting. It was remembering. Tama stumbled back, dizziness surged. And then, the mirror bloomed with fog, swallowing the room, pulling him inward. He wasn't in the present anymore. He stood in the ballroom again, but this time, there were voices, guests, music. Amelia, laughing in the distance. Sir, he could feel him like a second heartbeat. The room was alive. He tried to speak, but no one heard. He tried to touch, but no one felt. Then the music stopped. A door slammed. Gunfire. Screams. Blood on the marble. Time broke open. Again, Tama was back in the room. Then, the past. The diary. The dance. The mirror. Again. Again. And again. The loop. Each time, the same result. Love blooming too late. Truth buried too deep. Freedom comes just after the loss. And always, room 33, watching silently. Tama fell to his knees in the dream. Why show me this? He whispered. What am I supposed to do? And then, Amelia stood before him. Clear. Full. Real. You're the only one who stayed long enough to feel it all, she said. That means you can choose. Choose what? Whether the story ends with grief, she said, or finally becomes memory. She stepped back. The mirror shimmered, and Tama saw them, Soraya and Amelia, hand in hand. Waiting. For one thing, his voice. Episode 10. The light in corridor 33. The storm had passed, but the sky above Wisma Tumapel remained gray. As if reluctant to let the past rest, Tama returned one last time, no longer as an outsider. The house no longer creaked at his presence. The air no longer bit at his skin. Everything felt still. Listening! In his backpack was all that remained. Amelia's diary, Surya's letters, the lace fragment, and the pendant. He placed each item gently in the ballroom, on the floor where their final steps were danced and undone. Then, he walked to room 33. It was waiting. The mirror greeted him with a flicker of light. No fog, no whispers. Just him. And them. Amelia stood beside Surya. Their hands finally joined. Her eyes were soft, grateful. Surya nodded once, proud. Behind them, the corridor stretched on, filled with warm golden light. Something beyond walls and history. A place that couldn't be touched by time. Tama reached out to the mirror. No resistance, it shimmered. And as he stepped forward, the mirror stayed whole. No shatter, no scream, only a soft glow spilling gently into the hallway. Moments later, the locals who passed Wisma Tumapel that morning noticed something strange. The third-floor windows, dark for decades, were glowing with soft white light. And for the first time, the building didn't look haunted. It looked healed. Later, a book was found on the steps of the Malang Historical Archive, titled Corridor 33. A Love Untold. It bore no author's name, just a dedication page. For those who waited to be remembered. For those who loved before they were allowed. And for those who believe walls can carry voices. This is their light. T.S.